And I believe we are live. So welcome to Wizards and Warp Drives, the podcast where two grown men get deeply nerdy about things they love. My name's Newton, also known as Nacho, and joining me is my partner in crime, AJ Pickett.
How's it going?
Yeah, good, man. So, AJ, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, just in case there are some people that aren't familiar with what you do.
Oh, I do many and varied things. I've been writing for the game industry for next year will be 25 years.
Wow.
I started off with a article that I wrote in 2000, sent it into Palladium Books for the Rifter magazine, and that got published 3 years later in 2003. It was a long. You imagine like writers these days back in those days, you just sort of sent in a manuscript and forgot about it. Like it was.
Yeah.
It didn't even occur to me.
Yeah, it was a letter. Even emails were.
Yeah. And then lo and behold, I got an email. I got a letter back, and they sent me a check. It was great. And then that appeared in Rifter 23, the Blade Mage, which people are still playing and asking.
Might have to explain what a check is to some people.
Oh yes, it was money in the form of a piece of paper that you took to a bank.
Very popular. Very popular with students.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
And con artists.
I used to pay for fish and chips with a check
at
one point in my life.
We should explain what fish and chips are to some people.
Anyway.
And I've got a YouTube channel these days, which I'm most known for. It started off as a crafting channel. I was kind of that's why I'm also known as the Mighty Glue Stick, or go by the Glue Stick on my Discord server, because I am a artist and crafty guy. And as you can, people can't see on the podcast, but I've got a microphone shaped like a mimic. I started off making videos about monsters that I was making, like miniatures and terrain and things. I pioneered this way of doing terrain using printed out maps that you just cut and then stick on cardboard to give it a sort of an elevation, which was based on DM Scotty's 2.5D method of making stuff. But I just didn't like painting things. I thought, I'll just print out stuff and then cut and paste, and that was really good. And then I got Joe and Sarah Bilton from Heroic Maps, who were doing maps for Hero Quest at the time, and said, "Hey, would you like to do some maps for this method that I'm using for?" And I got a hold of there was a guy called Gareth over in Australia who's the DMG Info, and he came up with a modular set of all the pieces that you would need to make your average dungeons. And then so we made a modular set through Joe and Sarah Bilton, and then I basically built it and showed how you would arrange them all to make dungeons and stuff.
Dungeon tiles, 3D terrain.
Yeah, that anybody could make, like that a kid could make at home with some glue and scissors, and it was really easy. And then in the process of crafting other monsters and things like that, I started talking about the more lore of the monsters, and then that basically got me the audience that I am now. And now they really appreciate the in-depth research and stuff that I do on them. So I can point to that. I mean, that's how AJ appeared into my on my radar. Definitely, if you're going through your monster manual and you're unfamiliar with any monsters, definitely check out his channel. I think you've got the entire manual up there, haven't you? I've got the entire A to Z of the 5th edition monster manual. I've got starting in on like the Kobold Press monster manuals, and all like I get Dungeon Dad, who's sort of he does similar sort of videos to mine, except he does Monster of the Week, where he gets old obscure monsters from older editions and he converts them over to 5th edition. He says he's the only channel that does it. I actually do that too, but I don't pick a bone with him about it. But we have different audiences. He's more takes it and puts it into the game and sort of says, okay, use it how you want. And I'm more focused on the Forgotten Realms and more very in-depth knowledge about the Forgotten Realms. In fact, I think I've probably got the most, aside from the people who actually write for the Forgotten Realms, I've got the most in-depth videos about them. And I'm just starting out this year and going into next year doing videos where I go over every single territory in the Forgotten Realms. And so if you watch all of those videos, which there'll be like 60 of them, you'll have a comprehensive knowledge of what all the different regions of the Forgotten Realms are all about.
Well, you got a new monster manual coming out as well.
people's primary complaint is that it's too focused on fifth edition on the Sword Coast, and you don't know anything else about the rest of the place. And it's like, well, I can fix that, just by video.
That's going to be kind of our topic, and it's definitely something we'll be unpacking.
Yeah, but there's lots and lots of worlds.
Also, you're also the scribe of Candlekeep. Don't sell yourself short.
My alter ego has become more and more. So Ed Greenwood's got Elminster and Mert the Moneylender. Mert the Moneylender is more his alter ego than Elminster is, really, but he does.
My players are quite familiar with Mert the Moneylender. He's
a great character.
A little bit of a
He's a
bit
bastard.
of a womanizer.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, in my game, he is.
Yeah, Ed Greenwood is his Forgotten Realms is darker than most people realize, there's more sex and violence and stuff in his. It's definitely a different
sex
vibe.
And violence. Definitely plenty of sex and violence in my Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, he usually has a minder with him during Gen Con and stuff like that. When he starts talking about wizard staffs and things like that, they're like,
he's got a great channel as well.
Yeah. He's got a couple of people who are working with him now that help organize all that sort of stuff. So that's good. We get to see more of him. He's a very busy writer. He always has been.
Oh, yeah, he's great. He seems like a genuinely lovely guy.
And a prodigy. He's been writing since he was 6 years old.
And I'm just a nerd. I'm just a geek. This is kind of my first thing. I don't really have the cred of AJ.
I never would have seen this coming. It makes perfect sense when you look back at my life into graphic design and communication and computer science and stuff like that, but there was no YouTube or internet back when I was in high school. So this is not a career that they could have predicted, but it makes perfect sense that I'd be doing it.
So with D&D turning 50 this year, and with both of us being in our 50s, and also a new edition coming out, we thought it would be a great time to sort of cover the history of Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah, I'm literally as old as Dungeons and Dragons.
It's a big subject, so this is probably going to be a 2 or 3-parter, I think. So today, I really want to kind of look at the Gygax era of D&D, which will be kind of covering BECMI, first edition AD&D, and there's a lot of crazy stuff in between. But before we dive into that,
hold on to your shit, man. We're gonna get into some hairy territory here.
How did little AJ get into D&D?
My
word picture.
Okay, first of all, I was aware of Choose Your Own Adventure books. So I had already really enjoyed was the Warlock of Firetop Mountain and Death Trap Dungeon and those sort of things. And they were hard to get hold of. Yeah, the main reason why is because those titles were in bookshops. So they were novels for kids, and so I found them and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And so many people really were inspired by those that they don't get enough credit, I think, for preparing the ground for fantasy.
We need to do a deep dive into those books at some point.
Yeah,
and just probably into Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone as influences in our culture. Yeah, that's still going. They're still
Sir Ian Livingstone. And then I was in Woolworths with my gran, and she was in there. We were in there by ourselves for some reason, and I saw the red box set on the shelf, and I just gravitated towards that artwork immediately.
It's behind me.
Yeah, I've got some interesting notes about the artwork, which is really. I just noticed it last night. And I was like, ooh. They tell you exactly what the sets are about from the artwork, which I'll point out. So when you look at the red box, so when you look at the red box set, and it's got the dragon with a single horn on the front there, and the fighter, who's swinging his magical sword,
very Conan inspired looking fighter as well.
Fantastic Elmore art there, and it's you don't see anything.
This is the most iconic D&D art like this. If I had to sum Dungeons and Dragons up in one piece of art, it would be this cover.
Yeah, for sure. For our generation, absolutely. Like it's just that's why we wear it on T-shirts and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just beautiful. And what you see is a fighter in a dungeon with a dragon. Okay, there's nothing else going on. There's just treasure, dungeon, fighter, dragon, simple attire, and pretty straightforward. And then when you get to the next, the expert, the companion, where are we? The expert rule set, and you look at the artwork on this, you've got a dragon and more experienced fighter on a horse, slightly better equipment, and you see wilderness. You don't see anything else. There's no dungeon, just wilderness, right? So we know that the expert rule set is for the next level of experience, and you go outside the dungeon, start exploring wilderness and terrain.
We are going to dive more into the BECMI sets one by one. So
this is just the art bit of our little podcast here. Then in the companion rule set, we have a really experienced and well-equipped fighter who looks like one of the Dragonlance fighters, actually. Big magical sword, wrestling.
His sword is very oversized.
Super oversized. And then we got the dragon who was like coming in for combat again. But in the background, we see a castle. So by this level, your character is a lord of a domain. So they've established, it's about establishing outside of adventuring, what does this famous character do? And so it's about your retainers, you're building a legacy, you're taming the wilderness, right? Then in the next set, we've got the Master's Rules. Now the guy is like a king, still with a magical sword. He's riding a gold dragon high above the world, and you see a castle, the castle from this image here, right? He's now flying right above it, and see the castle leads down to a town and a port. So it's a region. He is responsible for a nation, right? So he is the king of that area, and he's looking for adventure beyond his kingdom. Then in the last set, the Immortals, he doesn't need a sword. His hand is a sword, a glowing beam of energy. The dragon is his companion and is looking out for adventure as well. And we see not just a futuristic castle and this really quite, like, there's a flying saucer on here. There's like discs and stuff. And then we see worlds up in the sky.
I actually never realized it was the same guy.
Yeah. and so...
That's blowing my mind.
Yeah, he's the idealized...
I've been looking at these covers for the last few days because I've got these books.
Mm-hmm.
I've never realized it's the same dude the whole time.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's like the idealized version of his younger self. And yeah, we've got worlds. So this is about he's immortal. So he's beyond that. He's achieved the level of exploring the universe. And so you progress in BECMI. It is the only what I call complete set of dungeons. It's the only complete game system.
We should
of
probably
Dungeons
explain, BECMI, what that means. Yeah.
Yes, but as I just said, basic, expert, companion, master, immortal, which is which means BECMI. Yeah, if you get the
series
first
of
letters
5 box sets.
Yep.
But you never played basic.
Not with other people, no. But really, if you go to D&D Basic, the idea was that you pick up the book and you can just read it from start here and teach yourself how to play. So it is it's the best starter set of any RPG I think there was. You know, it's really well written. But remember, this is the one that I'm holding here is the third sort of BECMI set that came along.
Well, yeah, when I get to the timeline, it's a game that came 2 editions. It's definitely it's on my topic list for today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very important part. So, but what getting back to the intro, you are actually playing BECMI now.
Yes. Yeah. Really, just recently. And it was thanks to the whole how Wizard of the Coast has kind of gone into the digital age in a not a very good way, which has resulted in lots of pain for their company and pain for the fandom, particularly pain for me, who's a D&D content creator. They could have certainly handled it a different way. But a lot of people have sort of abandoned modern Dungeons & Dragons, have gone back to older editions and also have explored third-party stuff. So we've seen an explosion in the last year or two, which I don't think we've seen anything like since the 90s, or when Pathfinder came along to sort of replace 4th edition. But we'll talk about that later.
When 4th edition, we'll talk about it, definitely.
Yeah, 4th edition is its own kettle of fish.
So a shout out to a couple of other YouTubers there. So Wally DM, he runs a little thing called the DM's Roundtable.
Yep.
He's currently got a BECMI game on the go with a few other famous YouTubers. A good friend of ours, Mr. Fred Wheeler from How to RPG, fellow Kiwi.
Yep.
Who else is on there? Ryan Doyle at the moment.
Yeah,
he's another YouTuber.
Mr. Welch.
Mr. Welch. Yep.
Yep. Mr. Welch is he's got a very he's basically the man. He's the man for Mystara lore. If you want to learn all about Mystara, then his videos are your go-to. Yeah, he's like me in monster lore.
Yeah.
And also, there's another guy who's not in our roundtable. The BECMI Berserker has got a channel that you should check out if you like BECMI stuff.
Yep. Yeah. So these are all different channels. Check out Wally's channel if you're looking for puzzles. He's the puzzle guy. Got a couple of puzzle books. He's got one puzzle book and one on the way, I believe.
Yeah.
Fred does a lot of live streaming. Fred does a lot of DM live streaming, helping DMs come to create stuff. He's so very prolific and good guys. I first came across Dungeons and Dragons via ET.
Oh really? Oh yeah, because they were playing in the game in the movie,
which is kind of released around the same time that they released. I don't know if it was a marketing strategy. It was kind of released around the same time as the red box, which is the third edition of Basic.
Yeah,
and I think ET came out in New Zealand around Christmas. And I was very interested in this game they were playing at the beginning of the movie, and that Christmas I got the red box.
Right.
And it was
so you actually sorted out. It didn't just sort of you didn't go into it blind.
I knew it's what I wanted. I wanted that game.
Yeah.
I saw it at the shops, and I just pointed to it and said, "That's what I want for Christmas," and I got it. Probably wasn't, expensive, so my parents were like, "Oh, okay."
Let's see. When my gran got it was $11, which she thought was very expensive considering, and much like the original people who bought the first Dungeons and Dragons box, it was just paper with rules in it. They were very used to buying things which were a simple rule set, which would have been like $2, and then the miniatures that you used to play the war game or whatever it would have been the expensive thing that they would have made the most money on. But the idea of buying just a rule set for like $10 or $11 was,
it was a good present for 1983. My parents spent $10 because I still have it. It's still in really good condition.
Yeah,
I still got the
probably
box.
The best gift, we have ever received. I mean, for me, it ended up being my career. So,
exactly. Yeah.
So my experience of BECMI was sitting on the floor after school. With terrible after-school programming on TV playing in the background, and books open and folders open in front of me, decorated with artwork printed out from cartoons and comics that I really like. In fact, I think it was my folder had the sequence where Spider-Man turned into Captain Universe from and my friends and I, though, we played AD&D. We didn't play play BECMI. So BECMI was just like I just played around with it at home, but I came up with a world which was based on the fighting fantasy world of Kaitan.
I only got as far as the expert set in BECMI and then moved to AD&D because I think that occurred around the same time that I hit secondary school, and that's what I lost the group of friends I was playing with at school with BECMI. I had to make new friends and found someone they were playing AD&D, so I kind of had to make the hard choice to move from that. I always preferred BECMI, to be honest, to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I didn't Dungeon Master. I should also mention the fighting fantasy world is Titan, not Kaitan. Sorry for anybody who's going to at me. The thing that I had.
We don't have social media, mate. No one can at you. We can say what we want.
We're in New Zealand. Come and get me. If you can handle a 23-hour flight in a COVID-filled tank, that's going to probably crash on the way. My experience of AD&D was basically Ashley and Max running the game. I didn't dungeon master those games. I dungeon mastered Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Rifts and things like that, and Traveller and other games. And we all had our own individual games that we sort of bought and became experts of, because that was our thing, you know. And through that, we had a diverse group of games that we could all play. So not one person who was the permanent DM, but we would switch different systems. So for us, role playing was never just D&D, and it's like that kind of separates our older mentality from the younger kids who've just, like, for them, their ET was Stranger Things. So they saw Stranger Things on the show, and then they went and sought out that game, and they found 5th edition, and they haven't really moved on from 5th edition until now. They're facing their 1st edition change.
There was an influx of role-playing games in the 80s that came from D&D. So actually, we'll go through what we'll do. We'll go through the timeline.
Okay.
So before we take a deep dive into it, we'll quickly go through the timeline of TSR up to 89. So just feel free to stop at any time if you want to add anything, or if you want to expand on anything in it. Let me just bring up my
occasional bit of controversy into it.
So we're going to start at 1969 with Dave Arneson met Gary Gygax at what would become Gen Con in Lake Geneva, and they teamed up on a game called Don't Give Up the Ship. So it was war games.
Yes.
So in the early 70s, Gygax, the idea of adding fantasy to war games were historically accurate. There was a war game culture in the States where they used little miniatures and painted battlefields, but it was always sort of real world history.
Yeah, they would replay historic battles like Napoleon's Waterloo, and it was very much like Dave Arneson
Gettysburg.
Dave Arneson was a younger generation of wargamers. Gary Gygax was part of the older generation of wargamers, but he was always sort of on the periphery. In fact, Gary Gygax quit gaming on a couple of occasions.
Several times.
Citing family and religious views and stuff, but really it was mainly financial stress and stuff because of living in Lake Geneva, which was a little town of 6,000 people. Yeah, he had 4 kids and one on the way. And there was just not a lot of work in Lake Geneva because they didn't have winter sports and stuff like that at that time. So most people commuted to Chicago.
Arneson created a supplement called Blackmore, which introduced a sort of fantasy element.
Yeah. Oh, we're skipping ahead there. I would like to mention Dave Wesley, who was the first dungeon master. He came up with the idea of he had a big bunch of people arrive at his house, like a mini convention sort of thing, to play war games. And there were so many people and so many war games that needed to be scheduled that he wanted to sort out who would play first. And so he came up with this mini game that was more like a cocktail party game. So picture them all milling around in his house, drinking beverages and talking. And each one of them was given a character that was like a spy for their army. And then he says, okay, you're basically playing that character, and your mission is to gather intelligence about the town that is at the center of this battle. And I will be sitting in another room, and if anybody's got any questions or arbitration, I will referee them, and you just hand me a note, kind of like a letter or correspondence, and I will hand back a note ruling on that situation. And he got lots of really weird requests, like how do we fight a duel and stuff like that. And people loved that so much that was a game in and of itself. They never actually got to the wargaming. They just played that. And that was, and so...
Role-playing.
And they called that Braunstein, the Braunstein style of play. That really was the start of role-playing. So Dave Wesley never gets enough credit for being the first dungeon master, really, although he was just the first referee. They didn't have dungeons and stuff back then. So he invented the concept of role-playing, like where it comes in as a separate referee and players, individual players playing individual characters.
Arneson's contribution was the mechanics.
Yeah, he introduced fantasy.
And the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, Arneson introduced the idea of, look, we've got people who like Lord of the Rings, we've got people who like Conan and stuff like that. We're stuck in these historical battles involving Napoleon and the Spanish and all that sort of stuff, Prussians and things. what about if you wanted to do fantasy? But the underlying idea at the time was that the older gamers didn't pay any attention. They thought it was silly. They thought it was childish.
They
right?
they were nervous. It was kind of an optional. It was like introduced as an optional rule.
Yeah.
To the war game. Like they were really thought they were just going to get laughed at.
Yeah.
Out of this particular niche hobby.
Yeah. Like anything, it's
one person that didn't laugh at it though was Ernest. Old Ernie Gygax.
Yeah.
His real name's Ernest. Not Gary. Gary's his middle name.
Yeah, his son's named after him, Ernest Gary Gygax. Yeah.
Yeah. And he created a game called Chainmail, which was influenced by Arneson's Blackmore game.
Yeah. So there's a lot of contention about who did what and who's really responsible and everything, but they are all, if you look at, like, if you step back from the controversy and their own personal battles and things like that, which got very acrimonious towards the end there, Dave Arneson would never have got Dungeons & Dragons off the ground. He just wasn't a marketing guy. He didn't have the stickability.
He couldn't drive.
Yeah.
He didn't have a driver's license.
Yeah, he was a brilliant guy. He was one of the most knowledgeable on ships of the line and the navies of the traditional world. Like, he was a prodigy in that respect. But personality-wise, he wasn't a guy that you would want to spend all day with, basically. Like, let's just say that. And he didn't gel very well with the company culture and things. He didn't
want to be a businessman.
No,
at all.
No.
He was kind of forced into it.
Yeah. So
Well,
although Dungeons & Dragons wouldn't exist without him, it wouldn't exist by himself. Gary Gygax, he wouldn't have come up with Dungeons & Dragons by himself either. And neither of them would have come up with the concept without Dave Wesley.
Both of them had their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And it is a shame.
Another person
that they were neither particularly good businessmen. It was a miracle.
The other person that I really want to mention is Don Kay.
Right. He was the third partner in TSR. Yeah.
Yeah. So Blackmore was like a supplement to a miniature game, war miniature game. Gygax really liked Blackmore. Thought that was great. He created Chainmail, which was just strictly a medieval battle system.
Mm-hmm.
Chainmail took off. During that time, I think Chainmail sold quite well. It was surprisingly well. So much so that Don Kay decided we should start a company. We need to start a business. So they got an investor by the name of, this name is going to be very important, Brian Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
He chucked $2,000 into the company, and they called it Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR.
Yeah, which was an insane amount of money considering. Like, the target market was, 6,000 people maybe scattered across the states. It was all mail order. It was all printed out by hand, assembled by hand and everything. And it was a very niche thing. Like, what did they value Dungeons & Dragons for originally?
$300.
$300. Like, if it failed, they would buy back the license for $300.
There was this clause. Yeah, so Gary Gygax had this clause that if Dungeons & Dragons went... so just before we get to that, so obviously we're still in the Chainmail days. Arneson and Gygax joined together, and they started working on Dungeons & Dragons, which was released as a series of little booklets, just little platforms that kept sort of these little paper booklets that they just slowly released over the years. And he had a clause with TSR that if it went out of print for longer than 3 months,
something like that,
he could buy back the rights of Dungeons and Dragons for $300.
Yeah,
that's what they valued the IP to be.
Yeah. And like, to give you some perspective, like me and Nacho just sort of starting off on this podcast, imagine if we incorporated as a business and gave each other shares in the podcast. That's how sort of highfalutin their ideas were compared to how important the actual game and stuff was at the time. Like, they had no concept that Dungeons and Dragons was going to be popular.
It was perfect timing because it was the 70s. High fantasy was coming in. Lord of the Rings. It was a perfect storm.
Yeah, so
just touching back on Don Kay though. Just one important thing before we move on. So Don Kay actually passed away in 1975. before he didn't even get to see. So he's the guy that basically told Gygax to make a company. He created TSR. He died in 1975 so him, Bloom, and Gygax were 3 equal partners into the business of TSR. They all had 3 equal shares in this company. When Don Kay died, Brian Bloom got his brother, I think his name was Kevin, to buy Don Kay's share.
Yeah.
So suddenly 2 brothers owned 2/3 of TSR. So immediately Gygax was out of whack in his own company from the beginning. So all these people that are like shitting on, WotC and Hasbro, this company has a history of like dumping on its creators from its roots. It's going to get darker. It's going to get darker as we continue as well.
Yeah, so from their very first interaction, their very first contract, Gygax basically bounced the check to go to Arneson. So Arneson didn't get any royalties that he was contractually promised to get for his contribution from the get-go. And that set the tone for the relationship going forward, that he basically just didn't trust Gary Gygax to pay. And also Gary Gygax was relying on money from this other guy, and he went off to some other place, and Gary was thinking about following.
The Bloom brothers had no interest in Dungeons and Dragons as a hobby. They didn't play the game. They were just businessmen.
Yeah.
So they changed the name as well from TSR to TSR Hobbies, and they obviously controlled the majority of the shares. I think they might have made Arneson director of research. I think that his was his title because he wasn't coming into the office, and
he got relegated to distribution, essentially warehousing. And he was doing a lot of writing and stuff, but none of his writing actually got published, which was just brutal. And he did a lot of editing of other people's work. And also Gary was kind of infamous for these days, not back then, but basically taking somebody else's idea, working on it himself to the point where he would put his name as the co-credit, and then if he thought that he had done enough to put his name on it and not give any credit to who made it in the first place.
He would have to edit like Arneson. We wouldn't have ability scores, saving throws, all the good stuff that we love. Arneson bought all that, but he couldn't articulate his ideas very well. That's where Gygax came in. Like Arneson's, it was the works of a mad genius. He couldn't actually read or write very well. His grammar was terrible.
So it's important to point out that Arneson was like he was the central linchpin of like the law master, the intelligent genius guy, but not very sociable. Sociable in a certain respect in gaming, but not personality wise. Of a new group of people who had arrived into the hobby, and they were of their own separated by location as well. So they were the Great Lakes gamers or something like that. And
it was all in Lake Geneva.
So they were like the new school of war gamers, and who they wanted to introduce fantasy and shake it up and stuff. And they were very like, they took the rules and they came up with different versions of this and that and this. Whereas the other guys were all about historic reenactment and knowledge about historical things and research and stuff like that. But Dave Arneson was also really, really good at that. So he got into that crowd through his knowledge and stuff like that. And then it was a slow sort of like, the old gamers weren't very receptive to the fantasy stuff because it just wasn't in their cool factor thing. Like it just was, like
one of the supplements as well.
Yeah, like an old school role player not playing Magic the Gathering, for instance, or not having any knowledge of Magic the Gathering would have very little idea of what's sort of coming ahead on Wizards of the Coast because they're not watching what's happening in Magic the Gathering first, And so, you're always in danger of that, of cutting yourself off from the full picture of something if you don't really embrace all aspects of the hobby. But and so it was a matter of slowly introducing wargamers to the idea of fantasy, and then making the leap to finding its own audience and saying, okay, there's a new bunch of people who are not of this mindset, who are more willing to embrace this new stuff, and that was the audience that took off. They just weren't aware of.
1974, they officially released Dungeons and Dragons at Gen Con as a series of pamphlets. Greyhawk was one of the pamphlets as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that setting has existed since 74.
Yeah, we should also mention Origins as well. Origins was a competing convention to Gen Con that Gary Gygax was obsessed with beating. He was quite adversarial in that way. He could have really embraced Origins and made it part of Dungeons and Dragons, but he just had this adversarial mindset that if he wasn't in control of it, then it was competition. And that was a pity, really, because Origins was quite often at that time bigger than Gen Con. And embraced lots of different war games and stuff. But yeah, Dave Arneson eventually migrated over to Origins.
I believe they just released a massive tome type book of the history of 74 to 77. Because it wasn't very well recorded. Someone's got it together now and archived it all. But
yeah, that was
1977. So 1977 is kind of the big year. That's when they realized, that's when the Bloom Brothers realized they had this hobby was growing, and they wanted to make it a business. So in 1977, we saw the launch of 2 editions. They split the game in half. Basic D&D, which was a sort of a simple and more newbie-friendly game aimed at kids around 12 and up. And then Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which was a more detailed and complex for the more hardcore gamers. And both versions came out in 77.
Yeah, the original Dungeons and Dragons sort of white box set, or there was a brown sort of wood box set, and then there was the white box set. The original one had the cover was basically a sticker of the artwork put on there, and they used, I think it was Sutherland did all of the artwork.
Not Donald Sutherland.
No,
he just passed away recently.
David C. Sutherland the third.
The third.
Yeah. So he was responsible for the rider rearing up and the cover and stuff like that. There wasn't even any
it came with an adventure as well.
Yep. But it was infamous. Like if you asked the Troll Godfather, the guy who invented Tunnels and Trolls, he went along to one of these early convention thingies, and everybody was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and he couldn't get a free table. It was just like it's just all Dungeons and Dragons. And he found the booklet of rules, and he picked it up and read it. And because he had nobody to tell him, because Gary Gygax was really, really personable, we should point this out. He was really, really responsible for like hands-on teaching people how to play. So he was pivotal in that regard.
He was great at teaching people how to play the game.
Always a very personable guy, and gave really, really good impressions to anybody who met him. He was a fantastic dude, who was genuinely really enjoyed people's company and remembered people and would go out and have drinks with them and stuff like that, right? So, like imagine going to Gen Con these days and you meet Crawford, and Crawford goes out to dinner with you, or spends a half hour talking to you about and teaching you a game. It's just like unbelievable. So that was the impression that people had of Gary Gygax. He was just like great. And so Kevin Andre, he showed up and he looked at the rules. He didn't understand it. He thought it was gobbledygook. And he went home and he typed up on a typewriter Tunnels and Trolls, which was more similar to the rule set for like the Choose Your Own Adventure games, but it embraced the idea of dungeons and, fighting dungeons and stuff. And it was a very simple game that's been pretty much the same all the way through Dungeons and Dragons. It's always been, So that was like the second RPG ever made kind of thing. It was the first indie game, you could say.
Yeah. So they took all these rules, they were just like supplement pamphlets that they had, and they complied them all. And I think it was a guy called John Eric Holmes that edited the first basic set.
Yep.
So he took all he was employed by the Bloom Brothers, and he took all these complex rules and kind of dumbed them down and made it into a more simplistic rule set.
Yeah, they wanted basically a starter set to introduce people to the hobby where you could learn it by yourself. So they had a really good solo adventure that you would run through.
And AD&D was basically Gygax's baby.
Yep.
And that's one of the rules he did stipulate with AD&D that Greyhawk he didn't want Greyhawk used in the basic setting.
Yeah. And that's the origin of Mystara. Shout out to Mr. Welch. So the Lord of Greyhawk started out as the Great Kingdom, and they basically just hodgepodged it together from existing stuff. So Gary Gygax came up with the idea of the town of Greyhawk, or the castle of Greyhawk. So Greyhawk was eventually just like Castle Greyhawk was a dungeon, because everything was dungeons, right? There was very little wilderness, adventures and stuff. And the way that they played it was quite different. Like if anybody's played Basic Edition, it's quite different from 5th edition.
That edition didn't come with dice either.
No, yeah. Polyhedral dice didn't exist, so they had like little chits of paper. And eventually they got some dice from...
I don't even know how that works. I looked at them and I'm like, how does that work?
Yeah, well, if you... Yeah. So he found some education tools, which were the polyhedral shapes, and then he turned them into dice. But there wasn't a D20. There wasn't a D%. Oh, there wasn't a D20. There was just 2D10 that you would roll.
No, yeah, there's the percentile dice.
Yeah,
didn't come out till later, I believe.
Yeah, well, but there was like a So it was quite different. And AD&D was the first thing that sort of used, I think, the D20 a lot.
Okay.
But yeah,
I'm going to just pause for a sec. I need to not have 3 coffees before we start this.
Yeah.
All right. Guys, when you're 50 years old and you have 3 coffees, you need to pee a lot. I won't be too long. Hang on. Just carry on talking.
Okay.
you feel that? No dead air, mate.
I'll go on a little bit about Basic Edition. So one of the interesting things about Basic Edition. Okay, so Basic started out with the basic set took you from level 1 to 3 and was concentrated on dungeons. The expert set took you from level 4 to 14 and expanded to wilderness. Companions took you from level 15 to 25 and was castles and lordship. And Masters took you from level 26 to 36, which was the top level that you could take as a human. Demi-humans were always limited, because the demi-humans, which included halflings, dwarves, and elves, had all these other abilities when they started out, kind of like the first introduction of level caps. So halflings could only reach level 8. But was one of the really interesting things is if you look at the titles back in BECMI of each character level had a title associated with it. And they carried that through into original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons as well. If you look at the Ranger, one of the titles for the Ranger is Strider, right? Because the Ranger is based on Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Straight up, it is Aragorn. So I've always said the reason why they keep failing with designing the Ranger class is because they keep deviating from the original intention of it being Aragorn. So the further a Ranger gets away from Aragorn, the more confused the class is because it's lost sight of what it was. Barbarian is another one too. Barbarian was originally the brutal savage warrior who was anti-magic. He is Conan. Conan is anti-magic. When you look at it, he's like, I don't trust wizards, I kill wizards. Wizards are bad. He doesn't have magical swords, he has steel. You trust steel, not this hoogie-woogie illusionist bullshit. Okay,
James L. Jones must die.
Yeah. So
twice Space Wizard.
So going over the different titles, level 1 fighter was known as a veteran, level 2 was warrior, then you had swordmaster, hero, swashbuckler, myrmidon, champion, superhero. So all the people who are going on about 5th edition making superhero characters, they've always been superheroes. And then level 9 was lord, and then it was just level.
Hey, when did the speaking of Strider, when did the Lord of the Rings animated movie come out? Was it around the same time?
I think that was the 70s too. Yeah. Probably around the same time.
So that probably added to the popularity.
Oh,
yeah.
There was Disney had the Black Cauldron, which is another fantastic. And the unicorn, what was the unicorn one?
Conan movie came out.
Yeah. So it was very much.
It was a big time for fantasy.
Sword and Sandals was very hot in the movies.
So from pretty much 77 to 81, D&D's popularity really took off. Another thing that also helped, I don't know if you want to dive into this as well. I don't have too much to say because I don't think it really had much of an effect for us here in New Zealand, was the Satanic Panic.
Oh, it had, periphery. Like it sort of hit later in New Zealand, actually. But we didn't have that whole, like, there wasn't people dedicated to like really trying to kill D&D like back then. And it was hysteria. It was a moral panic hysteria, very much like the social justice movement that we have now, where it becomes then it was like very religious motivated. Now it's more like social credit.
Basically a kid, I think what was his name? Dallas
Egerton.
Egbert.
Yeah.
Egbert.
Egerton.
During a game of Dungeons and Dragons, he decided to go off by himself down into a sewer and kill himself.
Yeah, it had
his mother said that he was influenced by the game, and
that was
this.
Like, so back basically it was parents who were so out of touch with their kid that they didn't understand like teenage depression, or like teenage schizophrenia being temporary or something like that was not even understood. And so he had problems, and he didn't deal with them very well because there was nobody to turn to. He couldn't talk to his parents. And when he
mental health didn't exist. I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm undiagnosed autistic. I was just told to, stop daydreaming.
Just wasn't a thing, right? Like my dad has dealt with depression his entire life, with undiagnosed, but we certainly felt it. And so he had mental problems, and he went, and it went south, and he killed himself. And his parents were so perplexed; they were looking for what is the cause of this, because it can't be us. We've done everything according to the parenting manual. We've sent him to school, we've sent him to this, we've paid for this, we've done for that. They never factored in the personal. We've never had a personal relationship with our son, and we didn't understand, and they didn't understand what had gone wrong. So they were looking for any evidence in his. And they saw this game that they didn't understand. It was like he spent a lot of time with his friends playing this game, and they looked at it. They didn't understand it. They saw dragons and monsters and demons and things, and they said, "It's this. This is what caused it." And they went on a warpath, as grieving parents will do when they latch onto any sort of cause to deal with their grief. They channeled it all into persecuting Dungeons and Dragons, and unfortunately,
what were they called? They're called bad.
Oh yeah.
Bothered about Dungeons and Dragons. That was the.
And if you look at some of their pamphlets and stuff, and the chick tracks and things like that, they're quite famous, and they're mocked these days.
It went so far that Gary Gygax had to go on to 60 Minutes and have an interview with the leader.
Yeah.
And Tom Hanks made a movie about it as well. Mazes and Monsters.
Mazes and Monsters, which basically was kind of the story of Egbert. And if you watch that movie, it's painful, bad movie. It kind of it takes that point of view of the people who are anti Dungeons and Dragons and saying, look, if you have and to this day, really, I think there is a valuable lesson there that Dungeons. I quite often feel like I'm stepping on some boundaries here, but there are certain people who shouldn't play Dungeons and Dragons. That is people who are delusional, right? Who go into like a psychopath, who go into a state of non-reality. People who gamify reality, for instance, can do some real harm if they think that people around them are video game characters and they're on a mission and they have to kill people and stuff like that. That's real, right? And so there is that risk that somebody with mental problems you might think is like autistic or something, but they're actually psychotic, and they should not be playing Dungeons and Dragons because they think it's fucking real, So there's.
I guess that's why they have all those. Fifth edition really encourages those safety rules, that session 0 conversation.
Yeah, I've always said that
with your players.
There's not just one Dungeons and Dragons. There's multiple. So you have. Your home game is a different kettle of fish to a convention game where anybody can sit down at your table. I've dealt with that myself at one of the conventions we had in Hamilton. There was a DM who I didn't actually see what went on. I just heard secondhand sort of what went on. But basically, he was running an agenda at that table, and the players were playing pre-generated characters, and he was running them through a real railroad, and they were disturbed, and I was just like, what are you doing? Like, what? This is a convention game. What are you doing? What's going through your head? These kids are not having fun. They're being traumatized by you. And what's your agenda? Why are you doing this? And the guy was just like, he didn't see anything wrong with what he had done. It was just like
reading the room is definitely a DM skill that you need to have.
Yeah, like in conventions, you don't have any sex stuff. You don't have torture. You don't have pets being killed. You don't have this. You don't have that. And anybody who has like, well, I'll run a game anyone I want, get them out of there. Like your personal agenda, we're not imposing on your freedom. We're stopping you from traumatizing people in this hobby. Basically,
one of my players was like, I want a game that's more like, I want a session that's more like Game of Thrones, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to let you fuck your sister, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and unfortunately, it quite often falls to people like me, older gamers who have been through all of this, to say, okay, what you need to do is you need to stop and get that guy out of there. And they're like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, it's not a game issue. This is a relationship issue. This is a person who should not be dealing with other people. They're not a person that should be gaming with other people until they get their mental state sorted out, you know?
So in 1981, we got a revised version of the basic set, and also the expert set came out.
Yeah.
So Tom Moldvay, he did the revision on the 1981 basic set. They also included Gary Gygax's module, which is considered a bit of a classic now, called The Keep on the Borderlands, as an introductory adventure. And David Cook, he did the expert set, so the basic set took, the original idea of the basic set was it took your characters from levels 1 to 3. Then after that, you should be advanced enough to go into advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and it was only concerned with dungeons. There wasn't any sort of wilderness or outside world sort of stuff.
Yep. And like in the original 77 basic rules, it would quite often say, if you want more information, please refer to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it was really designed to be an entry point to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
They started to realize, I think, that people that went from basic to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons found it too complicated still.
Yeah, because it was a mess. It was a mess. They had a lot of carryover from war games that wasn't really required.
Yep.
And it was the same sort of thing with going from 4th edition to 5th edition. 5th edition really took everything back to the drawing board and said, okay, let's look at everything. Encumbrance, experience points, is it really required? And that was the big divide between OD&D and Basic, is that Basic stripped everything back to what was required to play a role-playing game. And OD&D had all of that baggage from the war gamers because, simply put, original Dungeons & Dragons was the break into the wargaming hobby. It was introducing role-playing to wargamers. So it had to have a significant amount of wargaming and miniature stuff involved. But ironically, miniatures were very rarely involved. In fact, Gary Gygax thought that you only needed a handful of miniatures ever to represent stuff. And quite often that was how we played. Like, miniatures were so rare on the ground in New Zealand back then that we had one infamous wavy sworded giant figure that was basically every large monster was this giant figure. And Ashley ended up being like, he was convinced that every time that miniature was used, a player character was going to die. And it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy on his part. But yeah.
So I think
we only had a handful.
Expert took you to level 3 to 14, was it?
Level 4 to 14.
4 to 14, expert, sorry.
Yeah.
And it also introduced the world of Mystara.
Yes, yeah. The known world. So Mystara is really interesting because it's a hollow world. So it's kind of like took the idea that there was a lost world inside the world, and that was really cool. So it was kind of like, yeah.
And D&D, just the company grew. It became really popular, really rich. And the Bloom Brothers, there's something I came across that I just wanted to mention. I don't know if you heard of this. In 1982, one of the things that the Bloom Brothers decided to do with TSR is to fund an effort to raise a shipwreck from Lake Geneva.
I didn't know that.
Which had absolutely nothing to do with D&D. Gary Gygax had nothing to do with that decision.
Yeah.
He was completely outvoted.
One of the interesting things is they had, like, one of the conventions was like at a Playboy Center, because there was very little nightlife in Lake Geneva, but there was like a gentleman's club, I think, which they used on occasion. which Dave Arneson didn't like, and he didn't like the lack of nightlife.
So this is another point as
well.
Dave
Arneson didn't drink. That was one of the interesting things.
Yeah, so one of the other reasons behind this whole basic expert thing as well, which is kind of I didn't realize, as when we were talking about earlier, that Gygax had that contract, remember, that if D&D went out of print, he could buy back the rights of D&D for $300.
Mm-hmm.
He managed to convince a court that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was a totally separate system than Dungeons and Dragons. So the reprinting of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was not counted as part of that clause.
Yeah.
He also screwed Arneson out of any royalties from Advanced Dungeons. Yeah. So Arneson only got royalties from
he screwed him again.
Basic.
Yeah.
So the reason that the Blooms suddenly realized that they wanted to put more focus onto the basic edition of Dungeons and Dragons is because if they didn't and they just allowed Advanced Dungeons and Dragons to continue, that eventually there was a possibility that Gygax could buy the game back for $300.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing: like people who complain about Wizards of the Coast and their attitude, like particularly Hasbro towards creative talent, we got direct quotes from Gary Gygax in private letters, which he was like burn after opening, which luckily got preserved. Where the attitude towards creatives like Arneson was exactly the same. There's plenty, plenty of creative people out there.
Arneson,
we can get rid of them and get somebody else in.
Gygax, both Arneson and Gygax got fucked.
Yes, they did.
Different ways.
But it was the same corporate attitude, is what I'm trying to get across. Is that the Bloom brothers were just like Hasbro, essentially. They just weren't gamers, and that was the thing with TSR. Was very focused on everybody that works here must be a gamer, but the Blooms were a noticeable exception.
They financially crippled this company when it got. Which is
they had some they had like D&D sewing sets and stuff like that. It was some crazy shit.
So in 1983, Basic Edition was revised one more time. This time by Frank Menzer. It also included the classic art by Larry Elmore and Jeff Easley.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to Frank Menzer, who got shafted. Really, he was basically cancelled on social media. Back before it was a thing, for his comments about somebody who was writing an attack piece. History will show that basically he got screwed, and he withdrew from the social scene back in the day. But he's still around.
Yeah. So, and this is the birth of BECMI. So this is we got 1983. We got Basic and Expert revised. 84 we got Companion. 85 we got Master. 86 we got Immortal. So these were all different box sets.
Mm-hmm.
And his revision of the basic rules it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's probably he got rid of the introductory adventure. He divided it into 2 books. So I really just want to talk about the red box. I think.
Well, he made the introductory adventure solo, which is a really important thing.
So to learn how to play D&D, it actually walked you through a game. To start with, like
you make a fighter character, you fight, you meet Alina, you fight Bargle. Bargle kills Alina. You hate Bargle forever.
Bargle is in your current game.
Yes, we're currently running through the Kill Bargle adventure, which is kind of a it recognised that a lot of people want to kill Bargle because we never got to in the box set.
Because he killed. One of my first crushes was that beautiful picture of the clerics.
The artwork in D&D Basic is just so iconic. Like every single picture is a banger. I don't know if you can. Yeah, there's Alina there. Gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
So,
it really. So it started you off by read this book first, so you knew what you were getting. It came with some dice as well. You had to color the dice in.
Yeah, with crayon.
It came with crayon. So the first, it showed you how to roll a character, and then it showed you how to make a saving throw, an attack roll, and then it walked you through an adventure, basically like a choose your own adventure where if you go this way, you do that. And then after that, it introduced you to all the varieties of classes that you could be.
Yeah, and the amount of thought that went into the attributes and stuff, is I think only Pat Kilbane, who is a actor who had a channel called I can't remember what it was. He's made a documentary where he interviewed a lot of the original people, and it took a while for it to come out, but it's a really good documentary. The Keys Gary's Basement or something like that. And he examined the science behind attributes, and so for instance, strength is based on your muscle density for your body mass. So if you look at halflings and gnomes and things like that, for their body size, like a gnome, for instance, is the size of a kid, like a little kid, but it's got the muscle density and strength of an adult. And when you get something like that, you've got a chimpanzee. So if a gnome gets a hold of your face, there is no way that an adult human can physically pull them off themselves. So gnomes, I've said quite often, should be able to climb walls and rappel and run around on ropes and stuff like that, because their personal body strength is enormous, like, for grip strength and stuff. Body mass is what lets them down. So a human, of course, can slap them across the room because they're small.
Next time I play a gnome, I'm going for the face.
Yeah, exactly. They should have like grapple bonuses and stuff like that. It's like, don't let them get a hold of you. Not like dwarves, for instance, like being low to the ground and taking your knees out, for instance. Like, yeah, I like that. But so the science there was sports science, okay? That was based on sports science. Dexterity is based on your nerve conductivity speed. The faster your nerve conductivity speed, the more agile and graceful you are, because your body can make more split-second adjustments to the way your muscles are moving. You see, somebody with a really slow nerve conductivity speed has got a shaky hand because their muscles are going dit. Somebody with a really fast one, it smooths it out. Like you look at mine, my hand is steady as a rock because I've got very fast nerve conductivity speed. Yeah, we're looking at each other's hands now. You've had 3 cups of coffee, so it doesn't really count. But yeah, I had the advantage of going to university and studying biology, where I could actually hook myself up to an electrode, a measure, and we actually measured our nerve conductivity speed, and mine was 0.7 faster than anybody else. I said it was just because I'm older, but they didn't believe me.
So, other cool things in this red box that I liked as well. I don't know how you felt. It came with a blank grid.
Yep. Yeah.
To draw maps.
It
also came with keys.
Yeah, I've still got that. Keys. That is on my wall, and I love it.
It didn't come with an introductory adventure, but it did come with a kind of how to create a dungeon.
Yeah, and of course your solo. So
it really encouraged you to homebrew from the beginning.
Yes, yeah. Which is exactly what I did. I didn't actually play it. I just played solo. I just played basic by myself, essentially. So it was like I just world build and made magic items and things like that for myself. That was my entertainment with that, because there just wasn't anybody around to play originally.
Did you touch on did we touch on the classes for basic? I can't remember.
No, we haven't. So there was the fighter, there was the wizard, there was the cleric, or the magic user, I should say. Wizard was what they got called when they get to level 9.
Yeah.
So you'd start off as a medium, then seer, then conjurer, then magician, then enchanter, then warlock, then sorcerer, then necromancer, and then wizard by level 9. And then there was the
wizard's so squishy but so powerful.
Yeah. The intention of Gary Gygax was that people would play fighters, essentially. They would play a human fighter. Anything else was penalized heavily, essentially, because it was seen as unbalanced and too powerful from the get-go. Like wizards and spells, you got like 1 or 2 spells. By 3rd level, you had like 3 spells, and so you picture your wizard going into an adventure, casts his 3 spells within the first, 2 or 3 combats, and then he's essentially just a really bad rogue with no hit points at the end of it. And it's just like, why would you want to play that? So they get very powerful at high level, but low level they are called glass
The reason
cannons.
You want to play a wizard in that period of time is because you want to be wrestling Majuri.
Yes, essentially. So, Rasslin from Dragonlance was a wizard who was permanently sickly. Like he had to go through these wizard trials to become a wizard. And he came out physically transformed. He had golden skin, hourglass, like goat eyes, and he was permanently sick, like sickened, like a poison condition in 5th edition. But of course, he could cast spells.
He had powerful spells like sleep. I think he had light. I've just reread the Dragonlance novels.
Yeah, and after casting those spells, he was munted for like, ugh. I've cast sleep, and then he collapses, and then Karaman has to basically carry him. His brother was the fighter, and Karaman was like,
had to go do the Tower of High Sorcery where he paid with his like body and mind to have the ability to cast sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, you don't know how easy you got it in 5th edition. Then we had the cleric. The cleric was the acolyte, then adept at 2nd level, priest, vicar, curate, elder, bishop, lama at 8th level, and then patriarch at 9th level.
Wasn't druid a subclass of cleric?
Not until that was not in BECMI, no.
Okay.
Yeah. Ooh. No, they didn't have they didn't have subclasses in BECMI as far as I recall. And cleric is really good because you got heavy armor, you got blunt weapons. Their only real restriction is no bladed weapons. And they got clerics were your first tanks essentially. Really famous for having really low dexterity.
I learned what a mace was.
Yeah.
Because of the cleric.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that weapon before.
Yeah.
Until then.
And nobody knew what a Morningstar was. We always thought it was a spiked chain on a ball, but that's not what they were at all. Then we had, of course, the thief, which was the apprentice, footpad, robber, burglar, cutpurse, sharper, pilferer, thief, and then master thief.
The un-PC name of the thief.
Which got changed to rogue later on. But yeah, the idea of the burglar, of course, is Bilbo, the burglar. We need a burglar for our party, and we're going to choose a hobbit.
You forgot my favorite classes. The class of the elf, the halfling, and the dwarf.
Yeah. So the dwarf was essentially a demi-human fighter. So you were a dwarf veteran, dwarf warrior, dwarf swordmaster. The elf was a combination. So you at 1st level you were a veteran medium. 2nd level you're a warrior seer. So they combined warrior and magic user together. And that was why they all had really like severe level caps. You could only go to 8th level as a halfling. You could only go to
you couldn't go all the way, like they were capped.
That got changed later on with the Immortal Edition, where they sort of introduced the idea that some halflings and some dwarves and some elves could become immortals, so they didn't have a level cap. So that's where the idea of my character having a dire halfling. Do you think
that was just to stop groups from just being all demi-humans?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, because they were quite powerful. Like dwarves had those abilities. Like elves could find secret doors automatically, just rolling a d6. You could just be walking past. Essentially, it was a passive perception for secret doors. Dwarves had underground navigation abilities, so they were naturally better at navigating and surviving dungeons, and they had much better saving throws. And halflings, of course, were really, really good at hiding, and they were great ranged missile combat sort of rogues, you could say. So they combined elements of character classes and special racial abilities. Yeah. And also they had requirements, so you couldn't be a dwarf unless you had a strength of 13 and stuff like that.
So these box sets, they were lovely. I've got, you can't see, but I've still got my red box set. So they came out in these beautiful, much like how I guess the 5th edition starter sets come out. They've kind of emulated that since. Like AJ mentioned, I only just realized it's the same guy in every cover. There was, so obviously red, basic was red, expert was blue, companion was
green,
teal,
tealish, green, emerald green,
masters was black, immortals was kind of a weird
gold,
I didn't like the immortal
silver
cover. They were gorgeous, these gorgeous little box sets. And the idea was you collected each one of these box sets, and it became a totally separate game. Like, it was quite funny. Within nerd culture, it was already segregated. And that's where I felt when I moved from, secondary school. So I played in New Zealand. We had a thing called intermediate, which was kind of like a school in between, primary school and secondary school. So I played the BECMI during that time. But when I suddenly got to secondary school, it was like, what I play Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, what edition do you play? Oh, I play expert. Or we play advanced. It was already segregated.
It
was considered the by people that I guess would consider themselves. There was already a hierarchy there of between the two games.
Yeah, when I had the basic set, this new guy had arrived at school. He was a year older than me. His name was Max, and I had the basic red box set, and he had, I think it was the companion set that he had. He didn't even have the expert, so that was all I had to go by. And he wanted to sell me that thing, and I was just like, oh, I don't want to buy it off you. I want to play. And then and then it was me, JP, Max, and Ashley. And Ashley was a year older than us as well. And Ashley was the dungeon master of AD&D, and Max was the dungeon master of AD&D, and me and JP played, and then we bought other gaming titles, essentially. But Max and Ashley were very much AD&D, and then later on, Max got Rifts. Max actually came up with a concept for Rifts before Rifts existed. By the way, shout out to Max. He sent a letter into to Palladium saying, "Hey, what if there was this highly advanced?" Blah, blah, blah. His idea was that there was one half of the world which was fantasy and low tech, and the other side of the world was high tech and stuff. But Rifts, of course, was much better.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I was a dungeon master for basic, expert, but I was just a player when it came to advanced. Key Adventures, I guess, that came out around that time. In Search of the Unknown was they came in series. So I guess Adventures weren't these big fuck off books like we've got now.
Yeah.
I don't know why I keep showing AJ things because no one else can see them. But just to point up my example, I'm holding up a 5e, thick-ass 5e adventure and Isle of Dread, which came with the expert.
Yeah, well, Isle of Dread is when you've got Radiant Citadel there. So Radiant Citadel is like 5 or 6 different adventures.
I just grabbed a random book.
So these days they sell you a Gazetteer. So it's a bunch of rules, it's a bunch of new character classes, it's a bunch of adventures, all sort of lumped in together. And the problem with that is it scatters stuff all across different books. And
these things could become your DM screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the modules are around 30 odd pages. They came with this thin ass cardboard cover that could be removed. The inside of the cover had all the maps for the adventure, and they weren't connected really. You weren't playing this epic campaign.
Yeah.
It was just, they were very modular.
Yeah. The idea of playing a character all the way through just never really occurred to them because they knew the reality of the fact was that you would lose characters quite often in AD&D and Basic. The idea of having a campaign where you would play the same character through that had a 16-page backstory and was very player-centric just is a modern thing. It's definitely not an old school thing.
So, obviously, Mystara became the sort of campaign setting for BECMI. That was mostly fleshed out through, I think, a series of books called the Gazettes.
Yeah,
was it
Gazetters? Yeah. So that style of printing, yeah. And remember that Basic is the longest running edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Even 5th edition hasn't reached the length of time that that BECMI was around and being published and actively written for. So BECMI, as I say, is the most complete. Can we talk about Immortals for a second?
Yeah. I've got nothing to contribute to Immortals.
Right, not many people do. Like, I'm continually confounded by trying to talk about Immortals to other people who say that they played BECMI and they've never actually read the Immortals set. They don't understand it. But here's the thing, and I'm just going to flip over to the Dungeon Masters.
Is Immortals included in the rule Cyclopedia?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes. Okay. It's slightly modified because the Masters set hints at Immortals, and then Immortals kind of retcons some of the stuff which is in the Masters book and expands on it in Frank Mentz's very, very high concept stuff. And a lot of people have said, and I agree, that this is unplayable. Like, it's the time scales involved. Like, to get one power point is 10,000 experience points that your character has to accrue, which is not too bad when you're fighting titans and gods and things like that. But you imagine the lengths of campaign time. Like, you would have to be in a retirement village, playing this game every single day to reach the levels that we're talking about. This is beyond level 36. And one of the key points here, I'm just going to hold up a little highlighted thing, and it says here on this page, the secret of the multiverse. Now, multiverse being involved in the title here, there was, when Wizards of the Coast first sort of took over Dungeons and Dragons, they wanted it to be this world, this world, this world, and you'd see Eberron is a perfect example of that mentality. They wanted the worlds to be separate. They didn't want a multiverse. They didn't want the worlds to meet. They didn't want travel between the worlds. They didn't want.
I don't think it was. To be honest, I don't think it was just a Wizards of the Coast thing. I think when we get into second edition, I think it was when Lorraine. What's her name?
Lorraine Williams.
Lorraine Wayne Williams took over.
Yeah. Strange. It was Cynthia Williams and Lorraine Williams. Strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
no relation.
I don't fully pass the blame onto Wizards of the Coast for that.
Okay.
I think you'll see that when we get to second edition, and obviously a lot of campaign settings came out.
If you look through Immortals, essentially Immortals was this idea that so it took it's got a very Cthulhu-esque vibe to it. Like the idea is that the great old ones, the first beings that ever existed, which were kind of formless thought concept entities that dreamed reality into existence sort of thing. They created the multiverse just through playing with reality because they're that powerful. And then the Immortals were mortal beings on the worlds that weren't going to progress to be gods because they didn't die, right? So if you die, you have to die to become a god. That's one of the important things. Gods are restricted to being outer concept, outer planes, collective thought entities, right, that require worshippers to exist. And a lot of sort of concepts were lumped into the gods and stuff, and a lot of people think, oh, the Immortals are basically you're playing a god. No, you're not. You're beyond gods. Because in this, like, you spend power points to make an ability check to move a moon, for instance. Like, the things that Ao, like Ao and the Forgotten Realms, the Overgod, Ao is like, would be a really low-level immortal, kind of like a custodian of half of a planet. Ao gets a lot more credit than he deserves because he's only responsible for, like, Faerun, one little section of that world. He's not even responsible for Karatua. Karatua has got the Celestial Court, which is more powerful than Ao in many ways. So, I've got a bone to pick with, like, the inclusion of Ao because it was never really a good concept, and Ed Greenwood never really liked it either. So your character gets to a certain level. Beyond level 36, there's just, what do you do? How do I progress? What do I do from there? And it's like, okay, I'm going to travel off world and I'm going to explore the universe. So first of all, we need to establish what the universe is. The Immortal set does. So it tells you what a plane is, what a femto plane is, what a pico plane is, what it's like adventuring in mono-dimensional space and things like that. Like if you're flatland.
Do you think it was a reaction as well to what Gygax was doing in AD&D with, like, the manual planes? Like he was
No. I think Mensa was basically just they just left him alone in a room somewhere, and he was just coming up with this.
This is your baby. Yeah, this is your baby.
Yeah,
friend.
It's like, okay,
you've made us heaps of money. Just keep going, mate. Just keep going.
It's like, what is the ultimate player character? What is the ultimate thing that you could do? It's like become a god. Like, but what are the rules for this? And he came up with these rules of, like, how you integrate experience points and things. And like my alter ego character, the Sage of Canterbury, is an immortal, but he can't manifest as an immortal on Faerun, so he has to maintain his guise as the halfling sage. Because if he manifests his immortality when he's in the presence of mortals, he can kill them. Because he's, it's like, I am the Metatron. Just burn your mind out. Like your eyes just explode in your head. Like real, real Indiana Jones Ark of the Covenant shit.
Do you not understand the Dewey Decimal System?
So if we're looking at this, like, look at these illustrations of the outer planes being all these different shapes and things. So they get into the real nitty-gritty of how the multiverse is actually constructed. And Immortals, when they first sort of progressed to the spheres were established by the first Immortals. The Immortals basically, okay, I'm the Immortal of thought. I'm the Immortal of strength. I'm the Immortal of blah. And so each one of them has got a different set of really, really, really difficult tasks to perform as immortal to qualify to even apply to become an immortal. And so you have your home system in the prime material plane, and then you're assigned a section of space, which is like so many parsecs. It's like, okay, this 128 light years is yours to explore, catalog, identify any problems, and then report back, and then you're in control of it. Basically, like the Green Lantern is responsible for Earth and this section of space. It's like, congratulations, you're now Green Lantern. You have immense power of will. Cool. Now you're responsible for these 16,000 different inhabited worlds. What? What? So it's a massive leap from the traditional concept of role-playing to really high concept stuff. It's really, really difficult to run the campaigns. It's very, very much a departure from the traditional rules of D&D. And people it just didn't gel. Nobody ran it, as far as I know.
I had no interest in playing it or running it.
So every time I talk to people about the Immortal rule set, it's like, oh no, like, what's the ultimate goal? How do you win Dungeons and Dragons? You become an Immortal. That's how you win Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yep.
And it's like, nobody plays it. Nobody ever did. But there it is. It's the most complete set of D&D. It shows
you can't win Dungeons and Dragons, but you do get experience points.
Yeah. And
so there is a score.
Yeah. So in the Immortal set, it's you gain rank by acquiring experience points, building up power points by not spending those experience points. Because remember, in old OD&D and AD&D, when you built a magic item, for instance, you spend experience points. This was a concept from like Sinbad the Sailor movies and stuff like that, where a wizard would instill their life force into an item. And if you look at like the mythal concepts and stuff in Forgotten Realms, quite often the really, really high-powered spells required sacrificing a life. The person's soul is powering that spell. So you'd have a group of wizards who combine their forces and the natural world's forces, concentrate all that energy into one area, devoiding other areas. So if a really high-powered spell is going off, like, all of a sudden, all of your low-level spells aren't working because there's no magical energy. It's all being funneled into this over here. It's like redirecting a river to make a hydroelectric powered dam, for instance. That's exactly what mythals are like. So you have dead magic zones surrounding them because they've rechanneled the natural flow of energy into this particular space. They've hydroelectric power schemed, Waterdeep, and they've built an energy shield over Waterdeep which blocks all dragons going in there. Like, that's really, really powerful, and it requires the sacrifice of a life to keep it all together. Like, it's the life is like your computer system controlling the flow of energy, and then all of that energy is the mythal itself. And that's how it works. And the Immortals essentially use their experience points as power points, and they build up power points by hoarding their experience. And then they go and compete in what's called the Olympics, where they qualify to go up in rank in the Immortal hierarchy. And they've got different ranks up to the top dog, which is like the hierarch or something like that of Immortals.
Fuck me, I didn't think Dungeons and Dragons could get much nerdier.
I know, all right? It's just like, you read it and you're like, who would ever, like, how long would that take to come up with like 500,000 experience points? Like, it's just ridiculous. So it was concept stuff. It was high concept stuff, which I don't think even Mensa thought would really work but it was as a high concept system. It's brilliant. Yeah.
Right, I'm going to get us back on track.
I had to talk about Immortals. It's a passion of mine.
No, I didn't know anything about it. It's very interesting. So, what was old Gary doing during this time? So, Gygax moved to Hollywood during this time and started working on the D&D cartoon.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Which I think could probably be a topic in itself.
Yes. Particularly these, I think they might actually. I think we could revamp the cartoon. I think at this stage.
Oh, it's definitely got a cult following, and it never had, a final episode. I know there are like scripts available.
I've watched the fan made. They got a bunch of artists and voice actors, and they actually made the last episode, and I've watched it. I sent it to Mr. Rex actually because he was making a video about Venger, and he was like, "Who the hell is Venger?" And I said, "Oh, I sent some research to it." I said, "Okay, here's this and there's this." So I sent him the original script.
I watched the first episode again the other day, and it's like fucking Tiamat is in like You know, a 7-year-old kid is going to attack Tiamat with a club.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, a bunch of kids got sent from Earth to the Dungeons and Dragons world, which is actually a demi-plane, kind of like a domain
via a roller
coaster. Yeah, to a demi-plane, essentially a domain of dread where Venger is imprisoned, you could say. Venger is the son of the Dungeon Master. He was once good and being trained by Dungeon Master to be a Dungeon Master, essentially, a high-level Arc Wizard. He had a sister. Then at one point he made a deal with the Dark One, the Unknown One, and there the Demi Realm bordered right on the abyss. Like he could literally throw stuff out a window into the abyss from this tower that was perched on it. In that tower was a chamber with a vault where his original soul, you could say, was his goodness was locked away in a vault that he could only access with a key, but he couldn't touch it. So he had to convince the kids to go and get it. And then he wanted them to throw the key into the abyss so that no one would ever be able to unlock his original thing. And the thing is that basically Venger is a tiefling that's been possessed by a fiendish entity. That's why he's got the single horn and has that messed up appearance and stuff. And can fire energy bolts because he's a warlock. He's got a warlock. He essentially became a warlock instead of a dungeon master, and that's why he was all messed up and can fire energy bolts.
And the kids never got home. There was never no.
But in that story they did. But Eric decided to stay. Eric the Cavalier decided to stay. And the D&D world, all of the monsters and stuff got released and sent back to their original home planes. And the D&D that demi-plane got restored to an idyllic place where the Dungeon Master was essentially a demigod that was controlling everything and providing for everybody. So there was a conclusion to that.
This created this created more interest. Yeah. This kind of, I think it was also a knee-jerk reaction to the Satanic Panic as well.
Yeah.
To try and make it more palatable and more
show people what Dungeons & Dragons actually was.
Family friendly, and it definitely helped the game.
As much as streaming has changed and made awareness of the game much more of a household thing.
TSR itself was actually in financial trouble around this time. And the Bloom Brothers, Gygax was hoping to buy out the Bloom Brothers and take full control of the company. But the Bloom Brothers decided to sell their shares to a Lorraine Williams, who was a very... she didn't really care. She was a Christian, I believe.
Yeah. But so was Gary Gygax. He was a devout Christian as well.
She didn't care. She wasn't a gamer. They started doing... interesting thing. She stopped game testing at TSR.
Yeah, they had no interest in audience feedback whatsoever, so they had no idea.
That was a waste of time. Like, why am I going to pay people to sit around and play a game?
So they released products with no idea whether people were buying them or not. Their only litmus test was how many units they were selling.
She completely expanded the marketing of D&D. So we got comic books. What did we get? We got comics. There was a comic series. There were video games, novels, action figures. Action figures, interestingly, weren't based on the cartoon characters because there was that was a rights issue. Yeah. So, so that's where we get like these guys that are appearing on the cover of the new PHB. Yeah. They were originally just a toy line that was released in the 80s. They did make cameos in the cartoons, but
that was commonplace though. Like in the Transformers, for instance, the Decepticons were a completely separate toy line of guns that transform into robots in Japan, right? Totally unacceptable anywhere else in the world that you'd have like a gun. Give your kid a gun that transforms into a robot. And then the Autobots, of course, were cars that transformed into things, and they were separate toy lines that they combined and made a cartoon about to market the toys. Yeah, and then later on, the idea was we make a cartoon first, and then we make the toys.
So Lorraine Williams basically controlled TSR from 85 to 97, and she turned it into a goldmine. She mass marketed the shit out of it. It started making money again. It was in a loss, but she also got rid of Gygax.
Yeah.
During that period, 89. Something we haven't really come across, we haven't discussed at all that we've kind of skipped across is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
What that was doing in the time.
Let's see. Well, in our little faraway distant land of New Zealand, it was very difficult to get hold of any products at all. Though I think we had one importer, Blackwood Gale, and game stores would get, essentially it was when the container ship arrived, whatever was included in the container ship was whatever products were available for everybody to buy. So that was the reason why we would get separate role-playing books and stuff, because there just wasn't any, and we were very used to homebrewing our own worlds and stuff, so we weren't really interested in buying stuff for settings, like adventure modules and stuff like that, just weren't interesting to us. So it was pretty much, we bought main rule books. I think the only thing that really changed when I got hold of Palladium, because Palladium had really cheap, soft-bound, perfect bound books, which are still great to this day. Like, my argument is that hardcover role-playing game books are just a dumb idea. Like, the soft-bound ones are so much cheaper and they're so much better.
Yeah, my basic book is in much better condition than my second edition Player's Handbook.
Yeah.
And I probably use that less. So the main difference, I guess, with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, we got races and classes got divided.
Yep. We got subclasses. So we got the human. We got special class. Like, I remember one of my first interesting characters was a duelist, which was a character class which was from Dragon Magazine. We had Dragon Magazine. That's the most important thing with AD&D, I think.
It had an ongoing supplement. You had the human, dwarf, elf, gnome, half elf, halfling, and half orc. We also had the fighter, the magic user, the cleric, the thief, and specialized classes like the paladin, the ranger, the druid, the monk, the bard, the illusionist, the assassin. These all came in as well. The book first edition didn't really change much apart from its covers. Yeah, it got revised covers, but the contents for first edition pretty much stayed the same from 77 to 89. It did get expansion books, but just the original 3 core books. We got the original covers by David S. Sutherland.
Yep.
I didn't like those covers. I didn't have those.
I think probably the Dungeon Master,
the Player's Handbook,
the Dungeon Master Guide with the wizard and the dragon on it with the full color thing. The Astral Dreadnought with the guy flying in front of it. Those were the covers that I really
loved. The Jeff Easley covers. Yeah.
Those are so good.
I think the original 77's Player's Handbook was pretty cool. I ended up watching your video on what was his name? Murloc. What's the cover? Moloch, the demon thingy with the braziers. The statue where the guys are trying to get the gem out of his eye.
Yeah. I think that's Moloch. Yeah.
But yeah, Jeff Easley revised the covers. They're the ones I had, which had the Player's Handbook had the wizard on the cover. The Dungeon Master's Guide had a guy in robes standing in front of an open door
with all the monsters behind him.
And I think. And was the monster manual was a dragon fighting a Pegasus?
Something like... no, it was a dragon fighting a wizard, I think.
I ended up giving my books to Fred from How to RPG. I still go to say to How to D&D. Force a habit. For his channel. I ended up donating those to him. There also was some... key supplements that came out. Unearthed Arcana came out in 85. We got the Dungeoneer Survival Guide in 86. Wilderness Survival Guide in 86.
Oh, have we mentioned we haven't mentioned Eldritch Wizardry. That was quite important.
No.
Eldritch Wizardry. Okay, first of all, it had a naked woman on an altar being sacrificed to dark gods, presumably. And that put it very much firmly into the top shelf amongst the Penthouse magazines and stuff like that. So it was so it was definitely not marketed for kids. It included the rules for psionics were first introduced there, psychic powers in your characters. And it's really interesting that any character could have psychic powers. Essentially, it was just a random roll to determine whether you had, I think it was 5% or 15% chance of having psychic powers. But that was on top of whatever else was going on with your character. So it was really interesting in that way. Any character could be psychic.
Yeah.
And it introduced demons. And we had type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, which became the Glabrizu and the Nalfeshni and the Balrog and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the idea of demons and stuff like that was in there because it was eldritch wizardry. You know, it needed to have that sort of dark magic stuff to it. And
it wasn't your daddy's D&D. This one, this was
and also
this was grown up D&D.
And at the time, I mean, the whole Satanic Panic thing. This was before the Satanic Panic, and Gary Gygax was shit, man. Like we had an article about the Nine Hells where he's talking about how Satan was deposed by Bel and all that sort of stuff, right? So he was writing it with just I don't think any sort of concept that it was going to reach the audience that it did, for instance. Like he didn't think that, Christians and stuff were going to read this and take umbrage to it. But he was really firing shots over the bow of Christianity, really. So he was poking a bear which blew up in his face hugely with the Satanic Panic, right? And I got to say, it kind of was deserved in some ways. Like he really was poking the bear because, and here's the interesting thing: if you watch some of the documentaries, the reason why religions had such a problem with Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games in the first place is because religions take place through belief and imagination. That's their wheelhouse. Things which are outside of science, outside of physical explanation, are a matter of belief and imagination, and belief and imagination must be controlled and directed to good activity and civil-mindedness and all that sort of stuff. Controlling the minds, the imagination of people is very, very powerful. Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games are directly in opposition to that, and they always have been and they always will be. They are very much like your imagination is yours. It's free. It can't harm anybody. It's safe to imagine yourself as someone else doing something else. You can be an evil person doing evil things safely in a role-playing game, and it's no reflection on you as a person, right? You can play an evil character without being an evil person, and you can explore concepts. You can, and here's the really crazy thing. You're fighting evil. You're fighting demons and stuff in role-playing games, So, yeah. So religions had a problem with it because they looked at it and saw kids, being able to explore the ideas of demons and stuff like that. And like, what would it actually be like if I was a cleric who could fight evil and stuff like that? And really, that was a threat to religion. It was a threat to their authority. It was a threat to their control.
It was almost therapy before therapy existed. Like you could.
It was a drug
exercise.
It was a drug before drugs. So they saw it. They saw it as just as dangerous as LSD or something like that. It's like, no, we can't have people, fully exploring their imagination. That's dangerous as far as we're concerned.
That's how you get radicals. Yeah. And I just gotta let my dogs out. They've just been a pain in the ass. Hang on one sec.
So yeah, it was a direct threat to religion, and that was one of the reasons why they were so, anti D&D. And it's still a reason why a lot of Christians have a problem with Dungeons and Dragons, is because it pings off so many triggers that religion is built into them. And yeah, I'm not anti-religion. I am very much anti authoritarianism and draconian rules and controlling people's imagination and that sort of stuff. I think that's very, very dangerous, and it always has been. Like one of the reasons, that people burn books and stuff like that is
sorry about that. My neighbors started playing drums, and my dogs want to bark.
Right. Have you had any experience of like the Satanic Panic or people who have burnt their book collections and stuff because of their religious views?
No. I grew up in a very atheist family, so we lived on a farm. So I never sort of came across that, to be honest, during that period.
Oh, I certainly have. Like my family is kind of like genetically divided between atheism and religion. So like one sister is very religious. A brother was very religious for a long time, and how he sort of like chilled out a bit. My mum sent me to Sunday school when I was a kid, and I objected to that almost. That was one of the first things where I remember saying to my mum, "No, I don't want to go. It's bullshit. I don't believe in any of this stuff. It's nonsense." And yeah, it was like, it's not a good place to send your kids like daycare, you know. They were trying to indoctrinate.
I married a Catholic lady. My wife is Catholic, and my kids go to a Catholic school. So now I do have religion in my life now.
Yeah, it's.
But I'm
yeah. So I have I fully admit that I am biased, probably unfairly against religion, but that's because it's been shoved in my face and down my throat for a long time, and really I've had to deal with like what I see as just people going off into la la land, and then like they turn around and it's the moralizing and all that sort of stuff too. Like when they knock on your door to have you heard the word of Jesus lately? They're not doing it to convert you. They're doing it to be insulted and attacked by you, so they can go running back to their church and say, "Oh, the outside world is so nasty. You're the nice people. You're my community." It's to drive them closer together, not to spread their religion, but to actually isolate themselves from everyone else. We're better than you because we believe in this, which I object to. Right. I think that religions should basically just be a private concern, not a public one.
So I just want to go through some key adventures and settings of the first edition. So obviously Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is very much Gygax's baby. First edition was very much his. Second edition was, fuck you, Gary Gygax, this is my company now. And key adventures that came out during that period, Tomb of Horrors.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these have been reprinted into 5th edition now. Because of that.
Tomb of Horrors really encapsulates a concept at the time that Dungeon Master was an adversary of the players. And they'd like to downplay that a lot, but it's very true. That's, they actually...
It was a tournament game designed to kill players.
Yes, very much so.
The idea of this dungeon was to see how long you could survive.
And that was fun. That was accepted. That wasn't like a dirty secret. It was commonly accepted that the Dungeon Master would put horrible things. Like Grimtooth's Traps, for instance, was just full of...
5th edition players need to get over how precious their characters are.
Like they just haven't had enough experience of character death to realize how cool character death actually is. That it's the most memorable part of the game. Those are the stories that you tell 20 years from now. And the reason being is that your brain, when you're imagining these situations, your subconscious doesn't differentiate between imagination and reality in that regard. So when your character faces a life or death situation, you are training the parts of your brain which deal with emergencies and survival and stuff like that. And that your body as an ape is hardwired to remember life or death situations. Of course it is. So putting yourself in life or death situations through a proxy character allows you to become experienced in crisis situations without ever being in risk yourself. And I think that's the important thing. You need to threaten your character on a regular basis to get the full experience of Dungeons & Dragons, to get trained by Dungeons & Dragons, to deal with crisis and hostile situations and like stress, without actually damaging yourself, It's mind sports.
Other ones that came out at that time, Village of Homlet. I've never played that. I know Matt Coville goes on about that one. White Plume Mountain. They got reprinted in Yawning Portal,
that is a really good adventure. Yeah.
It's a really good, it's, if you've got players that are obsessed by magic items, I'd definitely run that because that's basic. It's a fetch quest.
Yeah. Also, it introduces, this is where Bruce Cordell comes involved. He came up with the concept of the Far Realm and aberrations. And he certainly came up with the idea of mind flayers. And that sort of stuff. So Bruce Cordell he's such a nice young man. He's such a, you look at Bruce Cordell and you wouldn't think he is the H.P. Lovecraft of D&D, really. But you look at the work he's done with Monty.
Dark side.
You look at the work. He is the alienist, I
was just looking at the time. Fuck, we only got 15 minutes.
We could do a whole podcast on him.
I think this might, like I said, we're not going to get through all this. Exhibition to the Barrier Peaks.
Yep. That was where we had sci-fi stuff.
I believe
a crash landed spaceship.
That got a lot of slack from the like, how dare you put sci-fi in my fantasy setting?
Yeah, people really didn't like the idea of laser guns.
That was Gygax. So.
Yep. And even in the 5th edition rulebook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, we've got laser guns and stuff in there, and cannons and firearms. So don't tell me that they don't have a place in D&D, because they always have.
A massive adventure that came out during the AD&D era, 1983, Ravenloft.
Right. Yeah. Castle Ravenloft. Castle Grey. There was a comedy game supplement, Castle Greyhawk, I think, which was slapstick comedy injected into the game, as I think is a perfect example of why you don't inject comedy into the game. Comedy just automatically arises out of Dungeons and Dragons. You don't need to write for it. Just make a the adventure should always be the straight man, and the player characters are the comedy. They're the zany hijinks.
The dice will determine the comedy.
Exactly. Yeah. The comedy of errors, as you say. And Castle Ravenloft is it got greatly expanded into domains of dread and all that sort of stuff. And I think these days 5th edition players are much more aware of it than we were originally. But it's essentially Dracula. You're essentially fighting Dracula.
It was originally Ravenloft was written by Tracy and Laura Hickman, and it was designed to be a one shot. That they played at Halloween, that became a game, and obviously that's gone on to become Curse of Strahd, and absolutely massive.
The cool thing about it is, like, some games have got a vibe, like Call of Cthulhu has definitely got a vibe, and Ravenloft has definitely got a Call of Cthulhu vibe. Your characters are doomed right from the outset. You can't get out of there, and you're gonna die trying to face this nightmare Dracula lord of the whole domain. And everything about it is funneling you inexorably towards that castle. And that's why it's a one-shot thing. It's not like a big campaign.
It also had a one of the coolest covers.
Yeah.
Module covers.
Yeah.
It was
very, very much.
The Dragonlance modules also came out, which kind of, I guess, was the first epic attempt at doing epic storytelling. I never played them. I read the books. We also got some campaign settings during this period. So we got the World of Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Forgotten Realms was introduced in 1987 by Ed Greenwood, Jeff Grubb, which has obviously gone on to become one of the biggest settings in Dungeons
The Forgotten Realms was really around for a long time because Ed was contributing towards Dragon Magazine, and the Forgotten Realms was really what he was writing about, and it was only sort of formalized into a setting in 87. So he'd been
87,
So he'd been writing the Forgotten Realms before Dungeons and Dragons even existed. And then when he got involved with the company, he was through the magazine and stuff. And Tim Kask was the editor of, shout out to Tim Kask, Curmudgeon in the Cellar. Go watch his YouTube channel. If you want to hear from the horse's mouth.
That box it.
Yeah, if you want to hear from the horse's mouth what really went on with TSR and stuff, Tim is pretty much the only living person who still was there. And he doesn't talk about it that much.
I also think we need to address the popularity of Dragonlance during this period as well. I could do a whole separate pod on Dragonlance. I love it. It's my favorite setting. And it's probably one of the reasons so many of us got very upset by the 5th edition treatment of it.
Well, yeah.
But that's a whole different. So the Dragonlance novels were massive in the 80s.
A lot of people, that was their first set of series of novels that they'd read. I think the first ever novel that I read cover to cover was C.S. Lewis' Voyage of the Dawn Treader was the first one. So it was still a fantasy novel. But my dad had a full bookshelf full of pulp sci-fi from the 1940s to 1970s. So the funny thing is, whenever I think about writing a novel, I always think about writing a sci-fi, not a fantasy novel, which people wouldn't expect. But I'm very much trained and run on sci-fi. Fantasy is just sci-fi with swords, as far as I'm concerned. That's why I really like the idea of the multiverse in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm always talking about the outer planes and stuff because it's really cool, highfalutin concepts.
Yeah. we've got 10 minutes, so I think we probably should just wrap it up with things that we didn't really touch on. THAC0.
Right. Yeah. 2-hit armor class 0 is what THAC0 means. It should be actually THAC0, but because we write it as THAC0. Gets a lot of flack, but essentially, when you're actually playing D&D Basic, the THAC0 chart, like a little slide chart thingy, is on your character sheet. So you never actually have to think about it. You just compare this number and this number. But it's like a weird backwards. It's basically like trying to hit like armor class, but in reverse. So its focuses is on your bonus rather than the armor class. And yeah, it's
not intuitive. It's not intuitive like the D20 system.
No, it's not at all. Yeah,
the D20 system just makes sense.
It's much easier.
It's why it's taken off.
Yeah. THAC0 was like reverse math, and the people who played war games and stuff like Arneson and stuff like that, where math was much more taught in schools, I guess you could say, and like math rocks is what we'd call dice back in the day.
Other games that were TSR tried to release during that period as well. In 1984, they made a Marvel superheroes game. I actually own this. And 1982, a sci-fi game called Star Frontiers, which I totally forgot about. But
don't forget
advertised.
Don't forget Metamorphosis Alpha.
It was
that was before Star Frontiers, I think.
Star Frontiers was advertised on the inside of my player's handbook. Which I totally forgot about.
5th edition has reintroduced a lot of the species from the races from Star Frontiers, including the controversy with the winged ape dudes. That was completely that was so crazy. Like, it was so obvious to me what they did when they printed that. So for those of you who don't know, Wizards of the Coast currently, for the last couple of years, their agenda has been to deteriorate people's confidence in print products in favor of PDFs, because PDFs they can microtransaction because they're in complete control, and they can sell it to you over and over again because you don't actually own a digital information that you've got access to online. Anybody who like all of the old stuff for 3.5 and 4th edition has been deleted off all the servers. It's all gone. And people paid for that through subscriptions and stuff. So it's just criminal that they're allowed to do that. And anybody who buys access to PDFs on D&D Beyond and stuff like that, you don't own anything. They can change it and copy it. They can change and edit and delete anything they want at any time. So they're trying to promote the idea that they can update stuff by putting stuff into the print products when they print them that is deliberately aimed at being just over the bow of outrage for a certain very vocal group of social justice warriors online.
They're litmus testing their own material that they can update later.
So they get these monkey people in Star Frontiers, put them into their Spelljammer supplement thing, and then they introduced this idea that they were a slave race, which was never a part of the original content. And this is the thing. They don't add stuff. If you notice, of all of the stuff that they're bringing from old edition to new edition, they don't add stuff to it. They just pare it down and simplify it. But in this particular one, they added a whole bit of offensive content to it, which was never in the first edition stuff, like the original stuff. But it's very clearly added to it to just get enough controversy to advertise it via everybody's outrage. And then they immediately changed the PDF to get rid of it. But of course, your print product is now useless because it doesn't match up with the digital content, which they've updated. So they say the digital content is superior to the print product. Ha ha ha, you should be buying the PDFs, not the, So they're deliberately trying to shoot physical products. Like they're literally just bang.
It's almost like a video game, like how video games do it now. It's applied. We'll release the game and then we'll just update.
Yeah. But it's that really insidious shit of trying to like put stuff in there to market via outrage. That's what I object to. It's like it's so slimy behavior. It's such immoral, unethical behavior to do that. It's just like, who is coming up, and I can guarantee.
Speaking of,
you, it's one particular guy at the company who's done that.
So,
still there.
Yeah, speaking of unethical behaviour, I think we'll call it at the Lorraine Williams era. That's where we'll start off again, because she did some pretty unethical things with the company. She made it a lot of money, but she did some shit.
Tune in next time where we rake them over the frickin' coals.
Where Gygax was exited from the company and it entered a new era with Lorraine Williams taking over.
And the end of TSR was the Dungeon Dice, which is where they lost all their money and couldn't recuperate and had to sell it.
Dungeon Dice was we'll get there, but that was something that they tried to compete with Magic. Magic the Gathering. That was their competition to Magic the Gathering, which is quite ironic because that's who ended up winning the game. Other things I just want to mention, and I think we might dive into some of these as separate topics. I really wanted to, just while we've got 5 minutes here, just quickly, games that were influenced by D&D in this period as well, like Warhammer, fantasy role-playing, Tunnels and Trolls, GURPS. A personal favourite of mine, Paranoia.
Oh, yeah. I love Paranoia.
There were lots and lots of games that came out during that period that I'd love to dive into. But we have 5 minutes left. So is there anything you want to close us up with?
I would just like to give a shout out to the companies which were competing against, or not really competing against Dungeons and Dragons, but did a lot to promote role playing because they just hit a different vibe, a different audience. Like sci-fi games like Traveller and stuff like that were really high concept, like space opera sort of games. And Traveller was not like Paranoia is very much a particular vibe, and Call of Cthulhu is a particular vibe. But Traveller was
these are things I think we are going to dive into episodes on separately.
But just like briefly an overview.
I don't think we should.
An overview, I'd say that, as I say, if you can take anything away from this podcast from me, is that I think that BECMI, the basic system, was the most complete version and the only complete version of Dungeons and Dragons rules that exist. Even if the end of it really needs to be updated and looked at. Like the Immortals system is good. It's a great concept. It's built into the very fundamental fabric of what Dungeons and Dragons multiverse is. And now I think it's the best time to really introduce the end game of Dungeons and Dragons.
It still holds up. You guys are playing it now, and you're still having fun. That system, it still holds up. If you're going to play an old school game, I highly recommend BECMI as well.
One thing to get used to with BECMI is that there's fundamental differences with a certain few elements. Like, for instance, you roll a d6 to determine your initiative at the start of every combat round. And you always determine the ranged combat first, then the spell combat, and then the melee combat in that order. Like, it's a very formulaic way of doing things.
Yeah.
And you don't.
If you wanna get a little bit of a taste of the game, jump onto Wally DM YouTube channel. He's got a live game going there at the moment. AJ's a player in it. And just watch it. Support Wally, support AJ, support Fred, and all the other guys in there. And that will give you a good feel of that game.
Like Critical Role, give a shout out to Critical Role as well for their effort in the streaming of the game and spreading the hobby to a vast, huge new audience. But don't forget that all the streaming games and stuff like that started off on YouTube and Google Hangouts and us. Like Ander Woods, for instance, was the first person to ever run a streamed game online. Like he should be just as famous as Matt Colville and Matt Mercer, because he did it first, right? And the attitude at the time was we were sick and tired of, like, during the 80s and 90s, the hobby was almost killed by grognards sitting at home who hadn't played the game in years, who'd never bought a new edition past second edition AD&D, who hated everything that the companies put out as a money grab. We don't need it.
1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute.
1 minute. I don't want you to cut off in your rant. I'm going to close it up. Okay, so thanks for joining us on Wizards and Warp Drives. Make sure follow us on Spotify and leave a review. Check out AJ's YouTube channel. We'll set up some sort of social media presence at some point. Next week, I think we're going to take a break from D&D. We're going to dive into another franchise from the 80s that is probably just as popular today as when it came out, which is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Man, I love the Teenage... Oh, this is going to be such a good episode.
It is. Yep, looking forward to it. That's bye from me.
Bye from me.
Bye from you. Thanks. Sorry, mate.